Spring, 1943. The African sun hung low over the olive-covered hills of Tunisia, burning through the dust raised by retreating columns of the Afrika Korps. What had once been Rommel's proud spearhead, that elegant, ruthless instrument of blitzkrieg, now looked like a ghost army. Trucks limped forward on mismatched tires. Tanks rolled on skeleton crews. Men with sand-crusted faces stared ahead, with the dull eyes of exhaustion. The desert wind carried not victory, but the dry cough of engines running on fumes. The campaign in North Africa was dying. The Afrika Korps, once feared and admired by its enemies, was bleeding out in the yellow light of a Tunisian afternoon. The British Eighth Army had pushed from the east, the Americans and Free French from the west. The end was inevitable, but in the chaos of withdrawal, a handful of German units still fought with the stubbornness of cornered beasts. And among them, something new appeared, slow, heavy, terrifying. Its movement was wrong for the desert, too heavy for sand, too deliberate for the open plains of Africa. Dust boiled around it as it advanced, its steel plates glinting under the sun like a moving fortress. The turret turned with a deliberate menace, as if time itself bent around its weight. To the Allied observers watching from the ridges near Mejez el-Bab, the shape was unfamiliar, yet unmistakably German. Rumors had preceded it, wild stories carried by telegrams and whispers from the Eastern Front. Soviet officers had described invulnerable monsters whose shells shattered Allied tanks from beyond visual range. Some thought it propaganda, others superstition. But here it was, emerging from the haze like a myth made real, the Panzerkampfwagen 66 Tiger Refer. The British officers raised their binoculars. "Bloody hell," one muttered. "That's not a Mark IV. Beside him, an American lieutenant shaded his eyes. "That's the big cat, isn't it?" No one answered. They just watched as the tank crawled forward, a predator testing its new hunting ground. Even before its gun fired, the soldiers could feel it. The deep mechanical rumble was different, not the shrill clatter of a Panzer III, not the strained growl of a Panzer IV. This was deeper, slower, arrogant. It was the sound of a V12 Maybach engine moving 45 tons of steel and defiance. The noise didn't just echo, it rolled, like thunder trapped inside the earth. In the distance, the Tiger halted. Its gun, the dreaded 8.8 cm WK-36, elevated slightly, searching. The crew inside moved with practiced calm. Dust settled. And then came a flash. The first shell struck a Sherman tank hidden behind a stone wall. There was no second chance. The blast tore the vehicle open, scattering its turret like a toy. A second shot followed before the smoke cleared. Then a third. Within 2 minutes, 3 Allied tanks were burning. For the men watching, it felt less like combat and more like execution. Reports from Russia had hinted at this, that the Tiger could kill anything before it was even seen. Now, those reports were no longer distant rumors from frozen fields. They were burning reality in the heat of Tunisia. But for all its power, something about the machine seemed unnatural, overbuilt, overconfident, out of place. It moved not like an animal adapted to its surroundings, but like a god forced down to earth, magnificent yet clumsy, suffocating in the wrong climate. The desert, with its fine dust and heat, was the worst enemy of precision engineering. Sand infiltrated the air filters, heat warped the seals, dust ground into every gear. Inside, the crew of Tiger 712 Oberleutnant Willy Henschel, commanding, struggled to keep the beast breathing. The smell of oil and sweat mixed with hot metal. The radio crackled with desperate voices, fragments of orders from a command already collapsing. Fuel was low, ammunition scarcer still. The crew knew that the next engagement might be their last, not from enemy fire, but from mechanical failure. Outside, Allied infantry pressed forward cautiously. They had learned to fear German armor, but curiosity drove them closer. Each time the Tiger's turret turned, its shadow swept over the sand like a passing storm cloud. The men felt small, fragile, yet exhilarated. Here was the embodiment of everything they had been told about German superiority, and it was right in front of them, roaring and spitting fire. A British sergeant, crouched behind a half-destroyed truck, wrote in his diary that night, "It was as if a cathedral had come alive and decided to kill you." The metaphor spread through the camp. Soldiers repeated it with nervous laughter, pretending they didn't mean it. The Tiger was not just a tank, it was a statement. It declared that Germany still possessed the ingenuity and arrogance to build something unmatched. Every rivet screamed confidence. Every shot from its 88mm gun proclaimed that technology could still win the war if only time would stand still long enough for it to matter. But time, like the desert wind, has no allegiance. By afternoon, the sky turned a muted orange. Dust devils danced between the dunes, wrapping the battlefield in a shifting haze. The Tiger moved again, slowly, methodically, its engine straining. To Allied gunners it seemed almost lazy, but its lethality was absolute. A column of Grants attempted to flank it, only to be halted by precise fire. The Tiger's gunner, trained on the Eastern Front, judged range by instinct. Every round hit. And yet, even as it dominated the valley, the flaws began to show. The tank's enormous weight chewed through the sand. Its tracks dug deep trenches that made turning agonizingly slow. When the terrain tilted, its engine roared in protest. A Panzer III could glide across this landscape. A Tiger had to fight every inch of it. The Allies, watching through field glasses, noticed. One American officer remarked quietly, "That thing's a fortress, but it's not built for Africa." He was right. The very qualities that made the Tiger fearsome, its thick armor, massive gun, and complex suspension also made it fragile under the wrong conditions. Each mile consumed gallons of precious fuel. Each repair demanded tools the desert could not provide. Still, in the moment of combat, none of that mattered. To the men on the ground, it was invincible. They fired artillery, called airstrikes, tried to encircle it, but the Tiger survived. Its armor deflected shells like stones off iron. As night fell, the great machine finally withdrew, disappearing into the dunes. The sound of its engine faded into the wind, leaving only the burning wrecks of those who had challenged it. For the Allied soldiers left behind, it felt like a visitation, the appearance of something beyond comprehension, gone as suddenly as it came. Around campfires that night, they spoke of it in the half-whispered tones usually reserved for ghosts and gods. Yet in every retelling, one truth remained constant. The Tiger had proven itself tactically supreme, a king on the battlefield. But in its wake lay a question, one that would haunt the engineers and generals who studied it later. If the Tiger was perfection, why did it look so exhausted just keeping itself alive? The answer, though not yet known in that dusty April twilight, would soon become clear in the laboratories and test fields an ocean away. For now, the desert kept its secret. The Tiger was still the hunter, and the Allies were still learning what kind of prey they had become. By late April 1943, the Axis front in Tunisia was crumbling. German and Italian forces were trapped between Montgomery's 8th Army, advancing from the east, and the growing Allied force pushing from the west. The once proud Africa Corps was now a patchwork of survivors, veterans from El Alamein, fresh reinforcements from Italy, and a handful of elite armor units desperately thrown into the furnace to delay the inevitable. One of these late arrivals was the 504th Heavy Tank Battalion, Schwerpanzerabteilung 504. It brought with it a new, almost mythical weapon, the Tiger Worms. Only a dozen of these massive machines had made it to Africa, unloaded at Bizerte and ferried south under constant air attack. Every kilometer of desert road claimed another vehicle to break down or sand-clogged engine. Those that reached the front looked invincible, but inside, their crews fought more against the desert than the enemy. Among them was Tiger No. 712, commanded by Oberleutnant Willy Henschel, a calm, meticulous officer from Hanover. He was 27, educated, ambitious, and believed utterly in the promise of German engineering. When he first saw the Tiger in Kassel, gleaming on the test ground, he thought he was looking at the future of warfare, a machine so powerful that it could reverse the course of the war. Now, under the pitiless African sun, that same masterpiece looked tired. The crew had spent nights scraping sand from the air filters, patching fuel leaks with rags soaked in oil, and cursing the Maybach engine that coughed like a sick animal whenever it inhaled dust. But still it moved, still it fought, and Henschel intended to make it count. The Allies were tightening the noose around Medjez el Bab, a key pass west of Tunis. Intelligence had warned of a possible German counterstrike, designed to delay the Allied drive long enough for evacuation ships to load at Bizerte. At dawn on April 24th, Henschel received his orders. Support a battalion of Fallschirmjäger, withdrawing under pressure, cover the road, and destroy any enemy armor in sight. The Tiger rumbled forward along a dry wadi, its treads biting through sand and stone. Inside the hull, the temperature rose above 50 degrees Celsius. The radio crackled with half-coherent voices reports of enemy tanks, artillery, confusion. Dust poured through every seam. Henschel squinted through the periscope. To the west, faint movement shimmered in the heat, a column of British Churchills and American Grants advancing cautiously through the olive groves. He gave the order. The driver throttled up, and the Maybach engine responded with a deep, metallic growl. "Range, 800, called the gunner, Feldwebel Kruger. Fire. The first 88mm shell punched through the leading Grant, setting it ablaze before the sound even reached them. The recoil shook the whole turret. The loader, drenched in sweat, rammed another shell home. "Hit," Kruger murmured, expressionless. 2 more shots followed, and the Allied column scattered for cover. Through the smoke and flying sand, the Tiger seemed unstoppable, a mechanical deity, dispensing destruction with measured precision. But then came the whistling sound of British 25-pounder shells. The first exploded close enough to rattle the suspension. Another struck the left side and ricocheted, gouging paint and pride. Dust flooded the interior. The driver shouted something felt wrong. The left track, chewed by shrapnel, jammed against a boulder. The giant lurched, ground forward another meter, and stopped. The transmission screamed, then went silent. Tiger 712 was immobile. Track damaged, Henschel snapped into the intercom. "We hold position. Loader high explosive. Gunner, keep firing." The Tiger's gun roared again, knocking out a Churchill trying to flank them. But the immobilized tank was now a beacon, a stationary fortress surrounded by enemies. The air shimmered with heat and cordite. Allied shells rained down, thudding harmlessly against the thick frontal armor, but each impact chipped away morale. Outside, Allied observers watched in disbelief as their rounds bounced off the German tank. "It's like shooting peas at a barn door," one British officer muttered. Requests for air support were sent immediately. Minutes later, the low growl of Allison engines filled the sky. Curtiss P-40 Warhawks dived, their machine guns spitting dust and sparks across the Tiger's hull. The armor held. The bullets left only scratches. But the concussions blinded the optics, cracked a periscope, and filled the turret with choking dust. Henschel cursed. were blind. "Elevation manual. Rotate slowly." Inside the tank, the crew worked like trapped miners. The loader's hands bled from handling hot shell casings. The driver's face was streaked with oil and fear. Every man knew the situation. Immobilized, isolated, outnumbered. Through the intercom came the company commander's final message. "All units fall back toward Tiburba. Destroy equipment if necessary." Henschel paused. His crew looked at him, waiting. The Tiger still ran, its engine idling like a caged animal. But to stay meant certain death or capture. He made the only rational choice: prepare to abandon, set demolition charges on the gun breech and engine, take only sidearms. They worked fast, disciplined even in defeat. Explosives were placed, documents burned, and the turret locked. Smoke grenades filled the air around them as they slipped out the rear hatch and disappeared into the ravine. The last thing they heard before leaving was the rhythmic cough of the Maybach engine, still alive, but dying. When the battle subsided hours later, a patrol from the 48th Royal Tank Regiment advanced cautiously into the valley. The air shimmered with heat. Wrecks of Grants and Shermans smoked quietly among the rocks. Ahead of them loomed something they had never seen: a tank twice the size of anything they owned, its armor scorched but intact, its gun pointing skyward like a defiant monument. The Union Jack painted on the nearest Churchill fluttered as they halted. The corporal in charge raised a hand. "Hold fire! Let's see what we've got here." They approached on foot. The Tiger's turret bore the number 712 in white outline, slightly blistered from the sun. The black cross insignia of the Wehrmacht stood out sharply against the dust. Bullet scars dotted the hull, but none had pierced. One track hung loose, twisted off the drive sprocket. "Good God," whispered one corporal, brushing his hand along the armor. "It's like nothing we've ever built." A young American liaison officer, attached to the British unit, whistled low. 88mm gun. Same piece they use on those anti-aircraft cannons. No wonder we couldn't touch it. The crew hatch hung open, revealing a dark, oily interior. The smell of burnt rubber and fuel was overwhelming. The British engineers crawled inside, flashlights cutting through the gloom. Everything was intact: the radio, the targeting optics, even personal items left behind. A pair of gloves, a photograph of a woman and child pinned beside the gunner's seat. It was as if the tank's soul had fled, leaving the body behind. By evening, word had spread up the chain of command. An intact Tiger tank had been captured. Orders came swiftly from Allied headquarters: secure it, tow it, and under no circumstances destroy it. The value of this prize was beyond measure. The engineers inspected the machine through the night. They were astonished by the craftsmanship, the interlocking armor plates, the precise welding, the massive transmission designed for raw power rather than efficiency. One British mechanic remarked, half in admiration, half in disbelief. The Jerrys built a cathedral when they only needed a chapel. Nearby, American officers took notes, sketched diagrams, and measured the barrel length. Intelligence units recognized the potential goldmine of data: armor thickness, optics design, ammunition type, crew ergonomics, all secrets that could now be studied and countered. But the Tiger's sheer scale also told a different story. The engine compartment, when opened, revealed complexity bordering on madness: twin air filters, cross-linked radiators, dozens of maintenance points crammed into impossible spaces. One look was enough to make an Allied mechanic shake his head. "Beautiful," he said softly, and completely impractical. That night, the captured Tiger stood alone under the moonlight, surrounded by curious soldiers. Some posed for photographs beside it, dwarfed by its size. Others tapped the armor with rifle butts, marveling at the sound: a deep, resonant ring that felt more like a ship's hull than a tank. One sergeant climbed onto the turret, looked through the cracked periscope, and muttered, "No wonder they thought they could win." But even then, as the desert wind whispered through the ravine, there was a strange sense of irony. The tiger had been conceived as a symbol of invincibility, yet here it stood, silent, abandoned, captured without a single Allied shell piercing its armor. It had not been defeated by superior firepower, but by the simplest enemy of all, the ground beneath its tracks. In the morning, a recovery crew arrived with heavy trucks and chains. The operation took hours. The immobilized tiger refused to move easily. Every tug seemed to awaken some hidden resistance in its gears. But by noon, it was finally dragged onto a flatbed, its barrel pointing east toward the rising sun. Photographs from that day still exist, Allied soldiers posing proudly beside the beast, their smiles half disbelief, half triumph. They didn't yet know that this single tank, Tiger 712, would soon cross oceans and continents, becoming the most studied piece of German armor in the world. For now, they only knew what they could see and touch. A monster brought down not by might, but by inevitability. The war in Africa was ending. In a few short weeks, Tunis would fall, and with it, the Axis dream of a North African empire. But before that final chapter closed, this one machine captured half buried in a Tunisian wadi had already written its own legend. The Allies had come face to face with the future of warfare, and for the first time, they realized that even the future could break down in the sand. Morning came pale and windless over the Tunisian hills. The smell of oil, cordite, and sun-baked metal lingered in the wadi, where the tiger had fallen silent. Around it moved men in khaki and olive drab, measuring, photographing, whispering to each other as if they were touching the body of some mythical creature. The war had turned the desert into a scrapyard of ambition, but this one machine drew reverence. It was not just another tank, it was a statement carved in steel. Captain Harold Simmons of the British 48th Royal Tank Regiment received orders that morning. Remove the German heavy tank intact. He stood before the 45-ton monster, its white 712 scorched but visible on the turret, and wondered if London truly understood what they were asking. The sand lay soft as flour beneath its treads, the left track twisted and half buried. Getting it out would require faith, brute force, and luck. He summoned a recovery crew, cursing the sun, the sand, and German engineering in equal measure. 3 Shermans were chained to the tiger's nose, 2 more pushed from behind, engines howling. Inch by inch, the blackened hulk crawled forward, dragging its broken limb through the sand like a wounded animal refusing to die. When at last it reached solid ground, men cheered and slapped the armor as though it could hear. Someone muttered that the thing deserved a funeral. Another replied that it would get one soon enough in a laboratory. The road to Tunis was a slow parade of exhaustion. Every bridge along the route trembled under the weight. Dust rose in columns that marked the convoy for miles. Civilians stopped their carts to stare. They had seen Panzer IVs, Grants, Crusaders, but never this. A machine that seemed to belong to another world. Mechanics swarmed over it at every halt, sketching diagrams, peering into the Maybach's sand-clogged lungs, prying off panels to see how the Germans had built such power into so small a space. "Too clever by half," Sergeant Walker muttered while wiping grease from his hands. "One gear breaks, and they'll spend a week fixing it." The others nodded. Admiration and contempt mingled in their eyes. At Bizerte, the harbor cranes groaned as they lifted the tiger from the dock. Chains thick as wrists creaked under the weight. Dockworkers swore in French and Arabic. Allied officers barked orders. The tank swung slowly through the air, sunlight flashing along its sides, as if even gravity hesitated to claim it. When it settled onto the deck of the American freighter, SS Ocean Freedom, a strange quiet fell. The crew looked at it with superstition. Some touched the armor for luck. Others made the sign of the cross. No one wanted to sleep directly above the hold where the monster lay. The ship steamed westward through calm seas, engines humming beneath the decks. Inside the dark cargo bay, the Tiger shifted with each roll of the hull, its chains creaking like breath. Sailors swore they heard it groan at night. Superstition or not, every man aboard felt that something alive rode with them, a ghost of the desert, heavy with unfinished intent. When the convoy reached Gibraltar under cover of darkness, the strait was alive with depth charges. Somewhere below, German submarines hunted. The Ocean Freedom pressed onward, its cargo unmarked, its crew forbidden to speak of what it carried. Weeks later, the freighter reached Liverpool. Rain washed the African dust from the Tiger's hull as it was unloaded onto British soil. Rumor spread like wildfire among the troops. The German wonder tank had arrived. Officially, it was listed as captured enemy equipment, but everyone knew what it was. Within days, the tank was transported by rail to Surrey, to the secretive testing grounds at Chobham Common. There, under tarpaulins and guard, the engineers of the Armored Fighting Vehicle Research Establishment gathered around it like priests before an altar. They had seen photographs, heard stories, but the real thing was more astonishing than any intelligence report. The armor was thicker than expected, the welds immaculate, the optics breathtakingly precise. Major John Milbank, the chief analyst, circled it slowly and murmured, "This isn't a tank, it's a cathedral that fires shells." The dissection began at once. Panels were unbolted, gearboxes opened, and the turret lifted by crane. German labels covered the instruments, precise and neat. The 88mm Mikotsutori 36 gun, identical to the dreaded anti-aircraft weapon that had terrorized Allied skies, sat like a coiled serpent in the turret. The engineers measured the barrel, weighed the breech, tested the recoil. The Zeiss optics impressed even the skeptics. The clarity made Allied sights look primitive. Yet admiration turned to grim amusement when they examined the engine bay. The Maybach HL-210 was a miracle of power and fragility filters, radiators, fuel lines packed tighter than the inside of a watch. A single misaligned bolt could cripple it. They built perfection for a world without dust, one mechanic said, wiping his face. And then sent it to Africa. By July 1943, the British report was finished. Its conclusions were both flattering and damning. The Tiger's armor was nearly impenetrable. Its gun could destroy any Allied tank before being seen. But its complexity, weight, and fuel thirst made it unfit for long campaigns. London wanted confirmation from its American allies, and so, under the cloak of secrecy, Tiger 712 was shipped west once more. At Glasgow, the tank was taken apart, its pieces packed in crates marked tractor parts, and loaded onto the SS Clan Murray. After a storm-tossed voyage across the Atlantic, the cargo reached New York in September. From there, a military train carried it south to Maryland, destination Aberdeen Proving Ground, the heart of U.S. ordnance research. When the crates were opened, the engineers stared in awe. Here it was, the beast that had haunted every battlefield rumor. Under a gray autumn sky, they reassembled it, panel by panel, bolt by bolt. When the last piece fell into place, Colonel Robert Hooper climbed onto the turret, looked across the proving field, and wrote in his notebook, "A magnificent monster conceived in genius, doomed by arrogance." The testing began immediately. They fueled it with precious high-octane gasoline, coaxed the Maybach to life, and drove it across mud tracks. The ground shook. American observers watched in silence as the Tiger rolled forward, slow but unstoppable, its engine growling like a giant restrained. They fired American 75 mm and British 6-pounder shells against its armor. The rounds bounced, leaving bright scars but no penetration. When a 90mm anti-aircraft gun was finally used, the steel cracked, and a cheer went up, not of victory, but of relief. The Tiger could be killed after all. As tests continued, admiration gave way to pragmatism. The tank's thirst was monstrous. 600 liters of fuel per 100 kilometers. Its gearbox overheated after less than an hour of continuous driving. Mud jammed between the overlapping road wheels until the suspension froze solid. Each repair required half a dozen men and specialized tools. The engineers concluded that the Tiger's greatest enemy was not the Sherman or the Churchill, but the calendar and the fuel gauge. "You don't command a Tiger," one mechanic said. "You serve it." Reports flowed to Washington and London. The findings were decisive. The Tiger was tactically brilliant, a fortress on tracks, but strategically foolish. It demanded more support than entire companies of lighter tanks. General Omar Bradley read the summary, shook his head, and remarked, "Fine tank for a country with gas stations every mile. Out here, it's just a thirsty coffin." Yet its capture spurred a wave of innovation. British designers improved the 17-pounder gun that would soon arm the Sherman Firefly. American engineers studied the suspension and armor angles that later influenced the Pershing and post-war Patton designs. In death, the Tiger had become a teacher. By the winter of 1943, the once terrifying 712 stood forgotten in a corner of the Proving Ground, streaked with rust and Maryland snow. Its paint had faded. Its great gun pointed aimlessly toward the Chesapeake sky. Soldiers on leave took photographs beside it. A mechanic chalked a phrase across the turret, "Tactical king, logistical fool." The words stuck. They summed up the paradox of German engineering machines built for brilliance, destroyed by their own appetite. Oberleutnant Willy Henschel, captured weeks after abandoning his tank, never knew how famous it had become. In a POW camp near Oran, he told an interrogator, "She was perfect, too perfect for war." He was right in ways he could not imagine. Across the ocean, his beloved Tiger had already given up every secret. Allied officers spoke its name with a mixture of respect and irony. Students at Aberdeen traced its lines in notebooks, learning what to imitate and what to avoid. When the war ended, the steel of 712 was melted down, its parts scattered into the anonymous peace of factories and rail cars, but its spirit endured in the improved guns that pierced armor more efficiently, in the doctrines that favored speed over splendor, in the quiet conviction that a tank must fight longer than it dazzles. The Tiger had entered history not as a victor, but as a warning. And somewhere in that Maryland field, beneath the snow and rust, the ghost of the machine seemed to whisper the lesson every army would one day relearn: that power without endurance is only spectacle, and perfection without practicality is another form of defeat.